Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window as I poured myself a second cup of coffee, still in a haze of our usual chaotic routine. The kids darted around, backpacks half-zipped, shoes untied, and Claire, ever the picture of efficiency, breezed past, issuing commands like a general. This was our normal, a steady, comfortable hum of life. Or so I thought. Then the phone rang. It was too early for anyone to be calling, and the unfamiliar number on the screen gave me pause. Claire's voice came through when I answered, sharp and urgent, not the relaxed tone of someone who had called home just the night before. My purse was stolen, she blurted out. Last night in the hotel lobby. I left it at the cashier's counter for a second, and when I turned back, it was gone. Her words came in a rush, each one dripping with frustration and stress. I could picture her pacing, her free hand running through her meticulously styled hair. I've already told my boss. She's sending me a new company card overnight, but I need you to cancel ours right away. I was immediately on high alert, though not for the reasons I should have been. Her distress felt so real, so tangible, that it didn't occur to me to question the details. That was Claire, always so careful, so prepared. Yet here she was, blindsided by an apparent lapse in judgment. Don't worry, I reassured her. I'll cancel everything. Are you okay otherwise? Did you lose much cash? Just a couple hundred, she sighed. And my license, unfortunately. I'll have to manage without it for a while. All right, I said, letting her words wash over me. I'll take care of the cards. You focus on your presentation. She thanked me, her voice softening. How are the kids? I miss them so much. They're good, I replied, glancing at Emma, who was attempting to balance a bowl of cereal and her tablet at the same time. They miss you too. That morning passed in a blur of cancellations and hurried breakfast routines. By the time I sat down at my desk to work, the events of the morning felt like a distant memory. Life went on. Claire called again that evening, cheerful and composed, as if the theft had never happened. Her resilience was one of the many things I admired about her. Weeks passed, and the incident faded into the background of our lives. I had nearly forgotten about it entirely when, one evening, I was rifling through a cabinet in the study. I'd been searching for our homeowner's insurance policy when I stumbled upon a folder containing some of Claire's financial statements. It wasn't unusual for her to keep records here. What caught my eye was the bold header on one of the statements, personal investment account. Claire had always been private about the inheritance she'd received after her parents passed away, a sum of $350,000, if memory served me correctly. I had never pressed her about it. It was hers to manage, and I respected her independence. But curiosity got the better of me that evening. I unfolded the statement and scanned the figures. The account had grown to over $400,000, impressive, but not surprising. Claire was as savvy with finances as she was with everything else. What did surprise me was a withdrawal of $3,000, made just days after her purse was supposedly stolen. The amount was listed as a check payment to a local jewelry store. My heart skipped a beat. Claire hadn't mentioned buying jewelry. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe she was planning a surprise gift for me or something for the kids. But the timing gnawed at me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a deposit for a family heirloom she wanted restored. Perhaps it was an investment piece, a rare item she hoped would appreciate in value. I decided to call the store the next day. The woman who answered the phone was polite and professional. I explained my situation, vaguely mentioning a problem with a recent purchase. We're just wondering about the warranty, I said, trying to sound casual. Oh, I remember that transaction, she replied. Your wife was quite upset when she came in. She mentioned her wedding and engagement rings had been stolen and wanted replacements. Her words landed like a punch to the gut. Wedding and engagement rings. Stolen. Claire had never mentioned losing her rings. She had been wearing them the morning she called about the stolen purse. My mind raced to reconcile the information, but nothing fit. I thanked the woman and ended the call, sitting in silence as the weight of what I had just learned settled over me. There was no logical explanation for why Claire would replace her rings without telling me, much less concoct a story about a stolen purse. A pit formed in my stomach as I considered the possibility that she might be hiding something far more damaging. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who snoops and accuses without evidence. But I also couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was deeply wrong. That night, as Claire slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Was there another man? Had she fabricated the entire story to cover her tracks? Or was there some benign explanation I was too blind with suspicion to see? I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. And if Claire wasn't going to give them to me willingly, I'd have to find them myself. The next morning, as Claire hurried out the door with her usual efficiency, the weight of my decision lingered in the air. I had never invaded her privacy before, but the questions gnawing at me were louder than my guilt. The minute her car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. Her laptop sat on the dining table, the screen closed but still humming. She'd always been lax about security, leaving it unlocked more often than not. With a flick of the lid, the screen blinked to life, and I was greeted by her desktop, a scenic photo of a mountain range we'd visited together years ago. The first thing I checked was her email. It felt like crossing a moral boundary, but I reminded myself that any answers I found would justify the intrusion, or vindicate her. As I scrolled, most of her emails were mundane, work updates, promotional offers, and confirmations for various subscriptions. But then I saw it, an email thread with someone named Jeremy. The subject line was innocuous enough, follow-up on conference presentation. But as I clicked into the thread and read further down, the tone shifted. What began as professional courtesy evolved into something more personal, peppered with inside jokes, compliments, and a familiarity that didn't sit right with me. By the third email, my hands were shaking. Can't wait to see you again. Last weekend was incredible. I keep replaying it in my head, one message read. Her response was equally damning, me too. I haven't stopped thinking about it. Same time next month. My stomach churned. The timestamps confirmed my worst fears. These exchanges lined up perfectly with her business trips. The stolen purse, the jewelry store, everything fell into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, my pulse thundering in my ears. Anger surged through me, but it was tangled with a profound sadness. This was the woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children. How could she do this? How could she stand in our kitchen, kiss me goodbye, and weave these elaborate lies? I needed to know more. The emails hinted at a deeper relationship, but they didn't provide enough detail. I reached for her phone, which she'd left charging in the kitchen. Unlike her laptop, her phone was locked. My first few guesses, birthdays, anniversaries, didn't work, and I nearly gave up before trying the most obvious option, my own birthday. The screen unlocked, and my heart sank even further. The messages were worse than the emails. Claire and Jeremy had been exchanging texts for months, their conversations ranging from playful banter to outright declarations of passion. My hands clenched the phone tightly as I read a recent exchange. Jeremy, looking forward to our weekend. I booked a suite with a view this time. Let me know if you need me to pick up anything special. Claire, just bring yourself. I'll handle the rest. Can't wait to be in your arms again. My stomach turned as I scrolled further, finding photos and videos I didn't dare open. I'd seen enough. The betrayal was undeniable, and with each new discovery, my fury grew. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, going through the motions of work and parenting while my mind reeled from the revelations. That night, I barely spoke to Claire, offering only curt responses to her cheerful chatter. If she noticed my mood, she didn't show it. It was almost impressive how effortlessly she maintained the facade. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that confronting her wasn't enough. I needed a plan, a way to expose the truth, protect my children, and ensure that Claire faced the consequences of her actions. The next morning, I called an old college friend, Tom, who worked as a private investigator. Tom had always been the guy who loved unraveling mysteries, and I knew he'd approach this with the same dogged determination he brought to his cases. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to get him on board. "She's been acting off," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to find out what's really going on during these work trips." Tom agreed without hesitation. "I'll start digging right away. Send me her travel schedule, and I'll see what I can uncover." Over the next week, I watched Claire more closely than ever. Every interaction, every excuse, every detail was scrutinized. It was exhausting, pretending everything was normal while my world crumbled beneath me. The kids, thankfully, were blissfully unaware of the tension, their laughter filling the house as if nothing had changed. Tom worked quickly, and by the end of the week, he had gathered enough evidence to confirm what I already knew. Claire and Jeremy had been meeting regularly, their rendezvous always disguised as business trips. He even managed to get photos of them together, walking hand in hand, sharing intimate dinners, entering and exiting the same hotel room. When Tom sent me the file, I stared at the images for a long time. The proof was irrefutable, but seeing it laid bare still cut deeper than I'd expected. This was the woman I loved, the woman I had trusted with my heart and my life. And she had thrown it all away for a fling with a man who would never love her the way I had. That evening, as Claire packed for another conference, I made my decision. I wouldn't confront her yet, not until I had everything in place. I needed to ensure that when the truth came out, it would hit her with the same force that her betrayal had hit me. For now, I played along, feigning ignorance as she kissed me goodbye and promised to call when she arrived. Watching her walk out the door, suitcase in hand, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm was coming, and this time, I would be the one holding the reins. The house was eerily quiet after Claire left for her conference. The kids were at a sleepover, giving me the perfect opportunity to put the final pieces of my plan into motion. With Tom's evidence in hand and a folder of meticulously organized documents on the dining table, I knew it was time to take the next step. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming control over my life and ensuring my children wouldn't be caught in the crossfire of Claire's selfishness. The first call I made was to an attorney, Rachel Donovan, who came highly recommended by Tom. Rachel specialized in divorce cases involving infidelity and had a reputation for being relentless. "Thank you for reaching out, Mark," she said during our consultation. "From what you've told me, we have a strong case. With the evidence you've collected, securing full custody of your children and protecting your assets shouldn't be an issue." Her confidence was reassuring, but I knew the road ahead would be anything but smooth. "What about the house?" I asked, my voice heavy with concern. "I don't want to uproot the kids." "We'll fight for you to keep it," she replied. "Judges tend to favor stability for children, and given the circumstances, it's unlikely she'll have much ground to stand on." With Rachel's assurance, I felt a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about punishing Claire, it was about creating a future for me and the kids, free from the lies that had poisoned our lives. The next call was harder to make. My parents had always adored Claire, and breaking the news to them felt like a betrayal of their trust as much as mine. "Mark, is everything okay?" my mom asked when she picked up. The warmth in her voice almost made me falter, but I took a deep breath and pressed on. "No, Mom. It's not," I admitted. "Claire's been unfaithful." There was a long pause, and I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Oh, Mark," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier now. "I have proof. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I just wanted you to hear it from me before things escalate." "We'll support you however we can," she said firmly. "And the kids, how are they?" "They don't know yet," I replied. "I'm trying to shield them from this as much as possible." As we hung up, a wave of relief washed over me. Sharing the burden, even just a little, made it feel less suffocating. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of preparations. I combed through bank statements, emails, and phone records, ensuring I had every shred of evidence neatly organized. When Claire returned late Sunday night, she was her usual cheerful self, oblivious to the storm brewing in our home. "Hey, honey," she greeted me, planting a kiss on my cheek. "How were the kids?" "They had a great time," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was your trip?" She launched into a rehearsed tale about meetings and networking events, her words as smooth as ever. But this time, I didn't hang on to them like I once did. Instead, I nodded along, each lie fueling the fire inside me. The next morning, while Claire was at work and the kids were at school, I met with Rachel to finalize the divorce papers. She reviewed everything with meticulous care, ensuring there were no gaps or weaknesses in our case. "This will blindside her," Rachel said, sliding the folder back to me. "Are you ready for that?" I nodded. She's been living a lie for months, maybe years. It's time she faces the consequences. By the end of the day, the papers were filed, and a court date was set. All that remained was the confrontation, a moment I had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. That evening, after dinner, I waited for the right moment. Claire was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when I sat down across from her, a folder in hand. "Claire, we need to talk," I began, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What's wrong?" I slid the folder across the coffee table. "You've been lying to me." Her face paled as she opened the folder and saw the photos, emails, and text messages. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes scanning the evidence with a mixture of shock and fear. "Mark, I can explain," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Don't," I interrupted. "I've heard enough lies. I gave you my trust, my loyalty, and this is how you repay me. By sneaking around with another man." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I refused to let them sway me. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said weakly. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. "Mistakes don't last for months. Mistakes don't involve secret trips and stolen moments. This was deliberate, Claire." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," I said, my voice cold. "You betrayed our family, our children. Do you even realize what you've done?" For the first time, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Please, Mark. Let's work through this. For the kids." "It's too late for that," I said, standing up. "I've already filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Her sobs grew louder, but I turned away, heading upstairs to my office. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and the first steps toward reclaiming my life had been taken. Downstairs, Claire's cries echoed through the house, a haunting reminder of what we'd lost. But I didn't look back. There was no room for regret, only the resolve to move forward. The weeks following my confrontation with Claire were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and difficult conversations. The children were the hardest part. Explaining to Emma and Ethan why their mother was moving out without shattering their sense of security felt impossible. I told them only what was necessary, that their mom and I had differences we couldn't reconcile, but we both loved them deeply. Claire moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. I insisted on keeping the house, not just for stability but because every wall seemed to whisper the truth of her betrayal. Still, as much as I wanted to close that chapter of my life, the memories lingered like unwelcome guests. One evening, while organizing the kids' school projects in the garage, I stumbled upon an old photo album. It was tucked away behind boxes labeled Christmas decorations and camping gear. Dust-covered and forgotten, the album was a time capsule from the early years of our marriage. I hesitated before opening it, knowing the flood of emotions it would bring. But curiosity won out, and I flipped through page after page of happier times. There we were on our honeymoon, beaming as we hiked through the Rockies. There was Claire, pregnant with Ethan, her hand resting lovingly on her belly. For a moment, I allowed myself to mourn what we had lost, not just the marriage but the version of us that seemed so invincible back then. I put the album away, swallowing the lump in my throat. It was over. I had to move on. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. The divorce was finalized, and the court granted me full custody of the kids. Claire's visits were infrequent and often strained, her guilt weighing heavily on every interaction. I focused on being both mother and father to Emma and Ethan, pouring my energy into their happiness. But something was wrong. At first, I thought it was just stress, sleepless nights, endless responsibilities. Then came the headaches, sharp and sudden, leaving me breathless. I brushed them off, blaming overwork, but they grew more frequent and intense. One afternoon, while coaching Ethan's soccer practice, I collapsed on the field. The diagnosis came swiftly and mercilessly: glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor. The prognosis was grim: 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. I sat in the sterile hospital room, the doctor's words barely registering. It felt surreal. After everything I had fought to rebuild, after clawing my way out of the ruins of my marriage, this was how it would end? I didn't tell Claire right away. Instead, I focused on making the most of the time I had left with the kids. Every moment felt like a countdown, a reminder of all I would miss. Ethan's high school graduation, Emma's wedding, the lives they would live without me. I recorded messages for them on my phone, advice for their future, memories of our time together, and words of love to carry them through the years ahead. Eventually, though, I had no choice but to tell her. Claire came over one evening, her face tight with apprehension when I asked her to stay after dropping the kids off. "What's going on?" she asked, sitting stiffly on the couch. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I'm sick, Claire. It's serious." Her expression shifted to one of shock and then disbelief. "What do you mean?" I explained everything: the diagnosis, the prognosis, the inevitability of it all. For the first time in months, I saw the Claire I used to know. The mask of guilt and distance fell away, replaced by raw, unfiltered anguish. "Mark, no," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This can't be happening." "I didn't want to tell you," I admitted. "But the kids need someone. When I'm gone." "Don't say that," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "You're not going anywhere." But we both knew the truth. No amount of denial would change what was coming. In the weeks that followed, Claire became a fixture in our lives again. She took the kids to school, helped with homework, and made dinner in my kitchen as if she had never left. At first, I resented her presence. It felt too little, too late, a bandage over a wound that had already scarred. But as the disease progressed and my strength faded, I couldn't deny the comfort she brought to the kids, and, reluctantly, to me. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, we sat together on the porch. The air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like shards of broken glass. Claire turned to me, her face pale in the moonlight. "I don't deserve to ask this," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need to say it. I'm sorry, Mark. For everything." I looked at her, the weight of her words pressing against my chest. It's too late for apologies, Claire. But the kids, they need you. So do better by them than you did by me. She nodded, her tears falling silently. For the first time, I saw in her the regret that I had so desperately needed to see months ago. It didn't erase the pain, but it softened the edges, just enough. I passed away 3 months later, in the house that had once been our family's sanctuary. Claire was there, holding my hand, tears streaming down her face as she whispered that she would take care of the kids. My final thoughts were of Emma and Ethan, their faces shining with the love and hope I had tried to give them every day of their lives. Claire kept her promise. She stayed with the kids, raising them in the house we had built together. They thrived, their laughter filling the spaces I had left behind. But in her quiet moments, when the house was still and the stars shone overhead, Claire would sit on the porch and remember the man she had betrayed, and who, in the end, had forgiven her in ways she would never forgive herself.